My Lord and my God, I firmly believe that you are here, that you see me, that you hear me. I adore you with profound reverence. I ask you for pardon for my sins and grace to make this time of prayer fruitful. My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me. I read this story on the I Pray with the Gospel app. During a chess competition organized in a youth club, one of the participants was a semi-professional chess player who made his way to the final easily. In the final game, a bitter crowd of beaten youngsters started supporting his opponent enthusiastically. In the first moves, his opponent managed to capture a few of his pieces. Everyone started shouting when each of those pieces was taken. But the champion kept smiling, unconcerned. And all of a sudden, he made a move and checkmate his opponent, to the huge disappointment of the crowd. When they asked him if at any moment of the game he felt he could lose, he replied, "Not at all," and added, "My opponent was doing exactly what I expected." Well, during this last week in Ordinary Time, we read in Mass the chapter 21 of St. Luke. This all happens in the temple, before your Passion, Jesus. After the encounter with the poor widow, the attention of your disciples turned to the temple. And here begins a speech that we will be reading in Mass until Saturday. The Gospel says that some were talking about the temple and its beautiful stones. And then you, Jesus, told them, "Do you see all these things? The day will come when there will not be one stone left upon another." Now, these words were shocking. Remember that the Temple of Jerusalem was everything for the people of Israel. What for the Brits would be the Houses of Parliament and Buckingham Palace and the Supreme Court, the British Library and the Vatican all in one. The Temple was everything for the people of Israel. And now you, Jesus, were announcing it would all be destroyed. When? They asked, terrified, maybe wishing that you would say, in a few centuries or in 1,000 years. But no. This was going to happen, as we now know, barely 40 years later. This chapter 21 of St. Luke, parallel to chapter 25 of St. Matthew and 13 of St. Mark, is quite terrifying. It is all a series of prophecies, and none of them is very comforting. First, there will be people claiming to be the Savior of the world, and deceiving many. Then you, Jesus, speak about wars. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, famines and plagues in various places, and terrifying sights and great signs from heaven. Plagues. Does this sound familiar? As I say, Jesus, this discourse isn't very uplifting. And it is not over. Tomorrow the Gospel continues. But before all this, they will seize you and persecute you. They will hand you over to synagogues and put you in prison. And you will be brought before kings and governors, and all on account of my name. We will be reading this sermon in the temple until Saturday, and it doesn't get any better. You will be betrayed even by your parents, brothers and sisters, relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. Everyone will hate you because of me. Now, I'm not going to read the whole chapter here, but with the proper soundtrack, this could sound like a trailer of a scary movie. In this time of prayer, I wanted to talk to you, Jesus, about those words inserted in the middle of today's Gospel that are so familiar to us, although in this Gospel they are slightly different. There are several instances in the Gospels when you say to your disciples, do not be afraid. You say it after the miraculous catch of fish, when you call Peter, do not be afraid. From now on, you will be a fisher of men. And to Jairus, when he was told that his daughter was dead, do not be afraid, only believe. When they saw you walking on the waters and thought it was a ghost, or when Peter and James and John saw you in the radiance of your transfiguration, during the Last Supper, in your first apparition after the resurrection, and in many other moments, how many times your disciples heard you say, don't be afraid. How did it sound with your voice, Jesus? A voice they knew so well. But in your words today, as you tell them about all the calamities that were to come, all the sufferings that they would have to endure, the trials and persecution, as your disciples started feeling frightened, you, Jesus, didn't just say, do not be afraid. Instead, you said, when you hear of wars, do not be terrified. You, Jesus, knew well how they felt, how their hearts were shaking by your words. You could see the fear in their faces, and so you commanded them not to be terrified. This was no piece of advice. This is imperative. This is a commandment. When you see these things happening, do not be afraid. Do not be terrified. Why? Because they are not frightening? Well, they certainly are. So why shouldn't we be afraid? Because they might not happen? Well, look around. They are happening. We should not be afraid because, Jesus continues, all this was to happen. Sorry, what? Yes, that's it. In the wake of the feast of Christ the King, the liturgy wants to remind us that our King knows these things have to happen. Like the boy in the game of chess. He knows what his enemy is doing. And this has to happen. So, do not be afraid. They are part of your plan, Jesus. You know what you are doing. You know why you are doing it. And so, Christ, King of the universe, the Almighty, you can command me now, do not be afraid, only believe. We don't know how these words sounded with your voice, Jesus, but they may have been very impressive. For we have not forgotten the sound of these same words said by one of your saints, St. John Paul II, and the echo of those words still reverberates in our ears. He said it in all languages and in all sorts of places, homilies, speeches. Those were his opening words when he was elected.
Non abbiate paura.
I have to say, the voice of St. John Paul II always gives me the chills. He said it in Spanish.
No tengáis miedo.
He said it to us.
Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid.
And if we haven't forgotten these words, in the voice of St. John Paul II, how could your disciples, Jesus, forget them? So, if powerful men come against us,
Do not be afraid.
and if the politicians create laws against life and marriage and morals,
Do not be afraid.
and if fanatic terrorists kill some of us, and if a virus spreads everywhere, and tornadoes and floods hit many places, and if international peace is compromised, and if the economy collapses and many lose their jobs, and
Do not be afraid.
Mary, my Mother Immaculate, Mother of Christ, King of the universe, don't let your children be the prey of fear. Let's never forget that it is not simply a piece of advice. It is the King's command to his people. Do not be afraid. I give you thanks, my God, for the good resolutions, affections, and inspirations that you have communicated to me in this meditation. I ask you for help to put them into effect. My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me.